Like many folks, I was surprised that we didn't get more Godwyn content in Shadow of the Erdtree. I didn't expect to see him show up at the end of the DLC singing Don't Call It a Comeback or anything like that, but the hints about something more directly involving him did seem to be there. Obviously, that didn't come to pass, and as others have pointed out, there are lore reasons why his return was always unlikely. But one thing the expansion did do in regards to Godwyn is that it shed some light on the thematic importance of his death. Based on what we learned about Marika's backstory, it's clear that although the shattering of the Elden Ring is the inciting incident of the game, the death of Godwyn was the inciting incident of her downfall. And in light of the expansion's final boss, I think you can make the argument that his demise is now even more essential to the narrative arc that leads to one of the game's most popular endings. But before I go on, if you are an Elden Ring fan, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me with the YouTube channel membership or over on Patreon. My dream is to make these videos full-time someday, and by doing any of those things, you'll be helping make that dream a reality. As promised by the story trailer and various press releases, Shadow of the Erdtree did explore Marika's backstory. All of the great lore YouTubers out there are still piecing things together, and the specifics differ depending on who you ask. But through a number of item descriptions, including the Tooth Whip, the minor Erdtree incantation, and the Golden Braid, we learn that Marika grew up here, in the Shaman village. Because the flesh of Shaman was said to meld harmoniously with those of other species, it appears that her people were rounded up and taken to Bani village, where they were whipped into submission and stuffed into jars. As revealed by the inner meat item description, the flesh of the condemned was then sliced up and added to the macabre mixture in an attempt to create living saints. The end result appears to be these horrifying monstrosities we can find down in the jails. Some suspect that Marika escaped this fate, perhaps even by using Marika's mischief, while others have theorized that the Eternal Queen might have been the lone successful attempt at creating a living saint. If so, it would give her origins a distant but interesting similarity to that of the Emperor of Mankind from Warhammer 40,000. Who is said to be the amalgamation of several shaman who sacrificed themselves to stop the tide of chaos. No matter what the truth may be, the important takeaway here, for our purposes, is that Marika was the victim of a genocide, of a mass slaughter that likely led to the seduction and the betrayal mentioned in the story trailer. Primarily, this gives Marika a tragic backstory, one that explains what motivated her to rise to power. But it also establishes her character as someone who lost everything close to her in her formative years. All of her friends, family, and fellow villagers were turned into these disgusting things. Marika alone survived, and no doubt carried the inevitable guilt that comes along with such a fate. After her rise to power, when it came time to start her own family, the horrors of her past, of what her people suffered in the lands of shadow, surely inspired her to protect her children with uncompromising ferocity. But it wouldn't be long before her brood was once again targeted, in the Godskin uprising. Much like with the Jar genocide, the fine details differ depending on who you ask. Some have theorized that the Glomide Queen was the god of the previous era, the Marika of her time. Others believe she was a rival Empyrean who rose up at the same time as Marika, and that they warred for control of the Elden Ring. Many suspect that the Glomide Queen was Melina, and that she led a rebellion against Marika at some point during her reign. Personally, I'm inclined to believe the latter, but for our purposes, none of that matters as much as what we do know about the Godskin uprising. That it was Marika and her allies who they targeted in their god hunt. And thus, it is surely the faces of Marika's people, either her direct family members or simply those who served under her, that adorned the robes of the Godskin nobles and the Godskin apostles. For Marika, the sight of these disturbing robes no doubt brought back memories of the jarring process. Once again, her people were being butchered and mutilated by a Crucible-aligned faction. So it should come as no surprise that at the end of the God Hunt, after Malekith had defeated the Glowmite Queen, that Marika removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. We've wondered for the last 2 years why she decided to do this, but based on what we now know about her backstory, a close reading of her character suggests that it was an attempt to protect those closest to her from death, or worse, at the hands of her rivals. And so, like Frigg in Norse mythology, who sought a series of oaths to protect Baldur, so too did Marika attempt to change the rules and logic of the lands between to ensure that death would never again come for her people. And yet, on the night of Black Knives, death reared its ugly head once more. In a coetaneous attack, Godwyn and several of her kin were slain by the Black Knife assassins using a fragment of the Rune of Death stolen by Ranni. Despite her best efforts, it was happening again. It's not hard to imagine the sorrow Marika must have felt at finding Godwyn's mutilated corpse and realizing that once more the body of someone close to her had been used for a dark and terrible purpose. First in the jarring process, then in the creation of the Godskin robes, and now as a mere accessory in a plot to circumvent the control of the Two Fingers. Ever since Elden Ring dropped, we've wondered if Marika herself might have been involved in the Night of the Black Knives, something alluded to in the description of the Black Knife armor set. She's certainly a schemer, as we see in the stories of Hugh, Malekith, and even Messmer. And don't mistake my reading of her as a tragic figure for absolution. From her betrayal of the Horn Scent to putting the fire giants to the sword, she has more blood on her hands than Lady Macbeth. So even if it weren't for the description of the Black Knife armor, suspicions about her were always warranted. But it's important to note that the Black Knife armor set specifically uses the word rumor, which makes it far less objective than most From Software item descriptions. And even if accurate, simply saying that Marika was close with these women does not necessarily mean she was behind the Black Knife's plot. It could mean that the Black Knife assassins were, instead, former friends or allies of her, who, for whatever reason, turned against her, much like she herself turned on the Horn Scent ages earlier. While there are still some details to iron out from a lore perspective, such as Malekith's belief that Marika betrayed him, this, I think, is the best way to read her character from an analytical point of view after Shadow of the Erdtree. That the murder of Godwyn broke Marika, that it was exactly the sort of tragedy she'd hoped to avoid by removing the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, a grim callback to the jarring of the shaman and the God Hunt. This is reinforced, in my view, by the placement of Godwyn's corpse at the base of the Erdtree. His positioning here is eerily reminiscent of the shaman grandma back in Marika's home village. To me, it seems that placing Godwyn here wasn't just an attempt to return his body to the Erdtree, as per the rituals of the lands between, but a sentimental act that Marika performed to remind herself of the tragedy that started her rise to power, and inspire her next steps. Because then, I believe that Marika, heartbroken at the death of Godwyn, decided it was time to come full circle and shatter the Elden Ring. But after so much loss, why was it Godwyn's death, of all people, that drove her to the edge? Well, looking at Marika's other children, it's not hard to see why. Her first set of demigod twins, Messmer and presumably Melina, were cursed with flame. Ranni, Radahn, and Rykard all either had red hair, a reminder of the giants that Radagon was known to hate, or simply had more in common with the Carians than Marika and the Newman. Mohg and Morgott were born as omens, which we now know is a curse of the Horn Scent. Mullane was plagued with scarlet rot, and Miquella, who, as shown in the DLC, has plenty in common with Marika, was stricken with eternal childhood. Every one of her children, except for Godwyn, who nobly defended Leyndell from the dragons, was imperfect. They called him Godwyn the Golden because he was the iconic heir to the golden lineage of Godfrey, but he really was Marika's golden child. Thus, when Godwyn died, when her perfect child died, in what was the third mass casualty event to happen to those closest to her, I believe it motivated Marika to pick up her hammer and undo all she'd created. I doubt it was done on impulse or something she immediately did, as there were still pieces to put in motion, like the return of the Tarnished and Hugh's task to create a god-slaying weapon. But I do believe that his loss was the inciting incident for her actions. And if Godwyn were to have returned in Shadow of the Erdtree like nothing had ever happened, then it would undo this key part of the narrative. It would be a bit like allowing Spider-Man to resurrect Uncle Ben, or giving Batman the means to bring back his parents. It would erase the key motivation of her character. And from a lore point of view, I'd wager that if it were possible to truly revive him in any way, shape, or form in the Lands of Shadow, then Marika probably would have gone there and done it herself. But because it wasn't possible, she decided to shatter the Elden Ring instead. So that's the importance of Godwyn's death as far as the narrative and Marika's character is concerned. But his continued absence is just as important to the journey of Ranni. Another topic of speculation in the community is why Ranni chose to target Godwyn. In terms of the specific ritual she wanted to perform, it doesn't seem like it necessarily had to be him, at least not as far as I can tell. Some have theorized that she chose him because of his connections to the Golden Order, or that perhaps the Fingers wanted him to be the next Elden Lord. But now that we know that yepeLaugh wanted Radahn to be his consort, and that there may have been an agreement in place about this, it's reasonable to wonder if there were other such arrangements within the ranks of the demigods. Which has led some to speculate that Godwyn might have been, or simply wanted to be, Ranni's consort. Maybe it was an arranged marriage, put together by Radagon to calm tensions after his divorce from Ranni. All of that is fun to theorize about, but entirely based in circumstantial evidence at best. The important takeaway here is that no matter what reason you personally prescribe to Ranni's choice of victim, there's almost no world where Godwyn was at all deserving of death, of having his body turned into a freaky fish guy. And as much as I personally love Ranni, the fact that Godwyn was just some poor schmuck who got caught in the crossfire is essential to her character. It's a reminder that even if her ending is arguably what's best for the lands between, and perhaps even deserving of the title of the canon conclusion of Elden Ring, she still built her reign on the bones, and the fins, of the innocent. There are few true heroes in the works of George R.R. Martin and Hidetaka Miyazaki, especially among those who seek to rule, and Ranni is no exception. Godwyn's death might seem cruel, unfortunate, or as many of us speculated over the last 2 years, prime for revisiting. But as evidenced by the sorrows of Marika and the journey of Ranni, it was always a grim narrative necessity. The inciting incident that preceded the inciting incident. And that's what makes Godwyn's continued death so important to Elden Ring. Thanks for watching. Huge thanks to Moonlapse Piano and yepeLaugh for allowing me to use their piano covers for this video. To check out all of their music, just follow the links down below in the description box. Big shout out to my Silver and Gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Corey Matson, Gustavo Balabi, Lil Caesar, Reed, and Pythonian, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time.